Russia accuses Ukraine of plotting to carry out a nuclear incident on its territory, then blames Moscow ahead of a key United Nations (UN) meeting. The Russian Defense Ministry said radioactive material had been transported to Ukraine from an unnamed European country and Kyiv was preparing a large-scale provocation. The aim of the provocation is to accuse the Russian army of allegedly carrying out an indiscriminate attack on dangerous radioactive facilities in Ukraine, which led to the leakage of radioactive substances and contamination in the area, the Russian Defense Ministry said, quoted by Al Jazeera. Russia has repeatedly accused Kyiv of planning false flag operations with unconventional weapons using biological or radioactive materials. However, no such attack has been reported to date. Ukraine and its allies have dismissed the accusations as an attempt to spread disinformation and accused Moscow of planning such incidents themselves in an attempt to pin the blame on Ukraine. Moscow's accusations come as Ukrainian officials press United States politicians to pressure U.S. President Joe Biden's administration to send F-16 fighter jets. Ukrainian officials say the F-16 fighter jets will enhance Kyiv's ability to strike Russian missile units. The request was made on the sidelines of the Munich Security Conference at the weekend, during talks between Ukrainian officials, including Secretary of State Dmytro Kuleba and the U.S. Senate and House of Representatives. They told us they wanted the F-16s to suppress enemy air defenses so they could get their drones beyond Russian front lines, said U.S. Senator Mark Kelly, a former astronaut who flew U.S. Navy fighter planes in combat. Biden last month said no when asked whether he would agree to Ukraine's request to deliver F-16 fighter jets. The U.S. should focus on providing weapons that can be used directly on the battlefield, rather than fighter jets that require extensive training, Biden administration officials said in statements Sunday. Discussions will continue over the coming weeks and months, said U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Linda Thomas-Greenfield. The Munich Security Conference, which mainly focuses on Ukraine, is being held days before the one-year anniversary of the Russian-Ukrainian invasion, which falls on the 24th of February. Kelly said that while it would take at least a year of training to master all of the F-16's capabilities, Ukrainian pilots could be taught to do a limited number of things in a few months. Provoking Putin's support is being built on both sides of the Atlantic to provide Ukraine with advanced NATO standard fighter jets. Britain said it would provide training. However, both sides have been reluctant to make significant use of their air power since the war began. Republican U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham said U.S. lawmakers broadly support training Ukrainian pilots to operate F-16s, and she believes the Biden administration will agree to do so soon. Graham said he wasn't worried the F-16 would escalate the conflict. "Don't worry about provoking Putin. Worry about beating him up," he said. The call to supply Ukraine with advanced jets comes following an agreement last month by France, Britain, the U.S. and Germany to supply Kyiv with modern battle tanks. Washington has provided some $30 billion in military aid to Ukraine since the Russian invasion began in February last year. Some Western officials say Ukraine's allies should focus less on advanced warplanes, but on basic logistics such as artillery shells. European Union Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell issued a stark warning about dwindling supplies of bullets and similar ammunition in Ukraine as it fights back from a Russian invasion. Ukraine is in a critical situation from the point of view with available ammunition, Borrell said. This ammo shortage must be resolved quickly, in just a matter of weeks, he continued. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken accused China of considering providing weapons to Russia, warning Beijing that any supply would cause serious problems. Blinken said China was considering providing lethal support, from munitions to the weapons themselves. The Russia-Ukrainian war made various countries' currencies weaken against the U.S. dollar. The war between Russia and Ukraine has been raging for nearly a year. Russia sent its tanks and troops to Ukraine on February 24, 2022, in what became the start of Moscow's full-scale invasion of Kyiv. In addition to thousands of civilian deaths, millions of refugees, and extensive damage to infrastructure in Ukraine, countries far beyond its borders are feeling the war's devastating effects. As quoted from Al Jazeera, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has affected dozens of countries' currencies to weaken against the US dollar in 2022, resulting in rising import costs. Owner of a home appliances company in Cape Town, South Africa, Luke Verfile said, "To absorb the higher costs of depreciating the rand, South Africa's currency, we had to cut our overhead costs, including staff." Given the complex interplay between geopolitics, commodity prices and financial markets, the Russian invasion sent shock waves throughout the global economy, including developing countries. The implications both within and between developing countries are known to vary. However, there are some general challenges, including from higher commodity prices. Even before the war, the global recovery from COVID-19 rattled commodity markets. Pent-up demand from nationwide lockdowns and economic stimulus programs drove prices up quickly. This trend was further reinforced by the Russo-Ukrainian War. Most hit energy and food importers. The jockeying for new supplies of liquefied natural gas, LNG, in Europe is driving up prices in the delivery or spot market. Benchmark spot prices for Asian LNG hit record highs last year, starving many of the region's developing nations for electricity. Energy importers such as Pakistan and Bangladesh have survived, but cannot afford spot cargo as much as richer European countries, said Global Director of Macroeconomics, Trade and Investment at the World Bank, Marcelo Estevao. Although estimates vary, Pakistan's foreign exchange reserves may be sufficient to cover about 3 weeks of energy imports at current prices. On the one hand, energy importing countries have been caught. Some may be forced to make savings, said Estevao. On the other hand, hydrocarbon exporters in the Middle East and Africa are getting a boost from higher energy prices. Especially those with spare capacity to increase production, he continued. For some energy exporters, such as Nigeria and Angola, higher oil prices are partly offset by rising costs of maintaining expensive gasoline subsidies. Meanwhile, oil importers with gasoline subsidies, such as Kenya and Ethiopia, fared worse. Similar problems have emerged in countries with large food subsidy programs. Before the war, Russia and Ukraine were among the world's largest suppliers of barley, maize, and sunflower seeds. Shipments of these supplies and other staples were badly affected by the Russian invasion. The two countries accounted for nearly 30% of global wheat exports in 2021. But due to Russia's blockade of Ukraine's Black Sea ports, a key shipping route for grain, wheat prices rose 35% in 2022, hitting a record high in March. Countries such as Tunisia, Morocco, and Egypt, one of the world's largest wheat importers, were particularly hard hit by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. About 2/3 of Egypt's population receive 5 slices of bread, known as aish baladi, each day, for as little as 50 cents a month, well below market rates. The difference is made up by the bread subsidy program, which cost the government $2.8 billion last year. Last June, Egypt's finance minister noted an increase in wheat prices would raise the cost of the country's bread subsidy program by $1.5 billion in 2022-2023. Strained under the weight of an expensive food program, the Egyptian government was recently forced to accept a $3 billion loan from the International Monetary Fund, IMF. Like other IMF programs, lending is conditional on fiscal consolidation. As long as the Egyptian government follows the state spending cut program, it will receive regular loan installments for the next 4 years. The world is struck by severe famine in countries with heavily subsidized wheat. Rising prices have a humanitarian and fiscal cost. But more generally, world hunger remains severe, said Maximo Torero, chief economist at the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO. In 2022, the FAO Annual Food Price Index, which measures changes in international food prices, is up 14.3% from the previous year and 46% higher than in 2020. As a result, 222 million people worldwide experienced acute food insecurity last year. The international community needs to adopt a portfolio approach to improve food security in developing countries, said Torero, referring to international trade bodies, multilateral development banks, and even private companies. First, agricultural and disaster insurance schemes can be scaled up. Second, Sources of food imports must be diversified and export restrictions removed. And third, we can build back better by investing more in developing countries' agricultural systems. IMF loans become more expensive meanwhile. War-induced inflation prompted the U.S. Federal Reserve, the Fed, as well as other leading central banks, to raise interest rates. Over the past 11 months, the Fed has raised its benchmark interest rate by about 4.5 percentage points in an effort to slow rising prices. Attracted by higher yields in the U.S., investors are withdrawing their funds from emerging market financial assets. The financial exodus led to widespread currency depreciation for developing countries against the US dollar. In addition to higher import prices, a fall in a country's currency also makes servicing foreign debt more expensive. To make up for the shortfall, developing countries such as Brazil and India issued bonds in their own currencies. In a move to stop the depreciation, they also withdrew large amounts of foreign exchange reserves. But for most developing countries, these steps are not an option. With few avenues for borrowing from private international lenders, legal agencies such as the IMF stepped in to address the problem. Analysis of IMF loans by Boston University shows that by the end of 2022, the volume of loans disbursed by the IMF will reach $95 billion in 27 separate programs. This is greater than the outstanding credit at the end of 2021, which is already a historic annual record. The problem for developing countries, as former Argentine Finance Minister Martin Guzman observed, is that IMF loans are also becoming more expensive. Guzman refers to the IMF's international reserve currency, known as special drawing rights, SDR. The SDR rate is a weighted average of the borrowing costs of the 5 countries that make up the IMF's reserve currencies. In 2022, IMF loan interest rates will increase in line with monetary tightening conditions in 4 of the 5 countries, he said, referring to the US, UK, Japan, China, and the Euro area. Guzman added, IMF loans to poor countries should avoid triggering inflationary cycles of advanced economies that are SDR baskets and focus on balance of payments challenges in borrowing countries. To overcome the large number of sovereign defaults over the coming years, there must be an independent debt authority as opposed to a lending institution such as the IMF, which can preside over restructuring in a timely and effective manner, said Guzman. Together with the uneven recovery from COVID-19, soaring food and energy prices, and widespread currency depreciation, the war in Ukraine added to the stress of an already hostile environment for debt-ridden developing nations.